Well, well, well. It seems like someone from the Spotify Archwell camp has been paying attention to the audience's opinion. I'm guessing they recognized how racist this podcast series really has been. And this week's Gaslighting Tuesday session, they managed to lure Paris Hilton to sit down with this insecure narcissist, Meghan Markle. The other guests that she had on the podcast were also females of Caucasian descent. Notice that after many people have cried out and said that Meghan Markle had been taking advantage of minorities, all of a sudden now she's put three Caucasian women to talk about a stereotype, oops, excuse me, archetype that labels women who are beautiful and blonde as bimbos. Trigger warning, this video will contain clips of this podcast to illustrate and emphasize certain points I will be making throughout the review. I know that many of us cannot stand to hear this woman's voice. However, it is necessary as I cannot replicate the tone and the little nuances that help me draw my conclusions on interpretation and understanding. Without further ado, let's get into ripping this apart. Right off the bat, Meghan is lying again, trying to change the narrative and rewrite history.
The other night, I was flipping through the channels on TV. This, by the way, is a rarity when you have two children under the age of 4.
There, she's got to make sure that everybody knows she has two kids, allegedly, especially when she has nannies and she has her mother and she has Harry and she's never home. Okay. Sure, Meghan. Oh, and let's not forget, could the other reason why she does not get to flip through the television channels is because she's on social media?
But I saw an episode of a game show called Deal or No Deal. This brought back a lot of memories. Back in 2006, I had a short stint as a briefcase girl on the US version of the game show. It was, for me, fascinating. I had studied acting in college at Northwestern University, so while Deal or No Deal wasn't about acting, I was still really grateful as an auditioning actress to have a job that could pay my bills. I had income, I was part of the union, I had health insurance. It was great. And yet, I had also studied international relations in college.
Example number one of where Meghan's trying to change history. She was not paying her own bills. In 2004, she had met Trevor, and shortly after, she moved into his home. Both of them enjoyed traveling abroad and eating the best foods. They went to Greece, Mexico, Thailand. They were hardly scraping together to put food on the table. And even though she barely earned any kind of money, it was Trevor's film scripts that earned him the income in which she lived a good life. Once again, she brings up that she went to Northwestern University and had studied international relations, which is a lie. She got a degree in international studies. They're completely two different degrees. But anyhow, either way, she went there and got some sort of international training. Why the hell didn't she know anything about the British monarchy or the family? Yeah, you see where I'm going with this. And just so you know, I went a little bit deeper and looked at the course catalog for Northwestern and international studies. The courses that are required do talk an extensive amount of British history. So she had some awareness of who the family was and what their roles were and their influence. So shut up, Meghan. Just shut up.
And there were times when I was on set at Deal or No Deal and thinking back to my time working as an intern at the US Embassy in Argentina in Buenos Aires, and being in the motorcade with the Secretary of Treasury at the time and being valued specifically for my brain.
At this point in the intro, Meghan is setting up the tone for her episode on the word bimbo. She is making sure that the audience understands that just because she was on this show in which the women were hired just for their looks, that she was really smart. And what we're seeing is her now separate herself from the perceived stigma or stereotype. In this recent video that I did, I talked about Meghan's early days where it was quite noticeable that she did not have the star factor or the it factor. and couldn't understand why her parents, or her father mainly, not be upfront and honest with her to tell her that, maybe this is not the route you should go because you are so smart. You can do something else with your brain. So, anyway, it then comes back full circle to say that the influences, if Megan was not comfortable or this was not the path that she should have gone down, then I do think that Thomas did fail in that perspective in guiding her down a different path. When Megan got the show for Deal or No Deal, she told her father that she felt uncomfortable doing it. In the book that keeps on giving, Revenge by Tom Bauer, Thomas Markle is quoted in saying that after Megan had confronted him about being on this show and said that it was embarrassing, he told her that if you're spotted, you'll get another part. It will take time to get there. And then Tom Bauer writes, Thomas knew that to win stardom, Hollywood expected Megan to do anything. Humiliation was one of the prices of winning fame. Now, I don't think that Megan was uncomfortable because she felt prudish. I think it's because she felt inferior to the real models on Deal or No Deal. As I have stated before and many times over, Meghan Markle is a very insecure woman. She's not comfortable in her own skin. And because LA is the land of the blondes and the big boobs, she had everything that was not traditionally common within her city. One thing I want to note before we move on is that throughout this podcast, she keeps emphasizing that she was always the smart one, the smart one. She didn't consider herself as the pretty one. She was always the smart one. So, more distancing, from using her sexual talents to making it more intellectual and it has merit of some sort. Megan went to a really good university, but don't necessarily assume that she was accepted because she was so smart. Obviously, she had to have above average grades as, a foundation, but there are other factors that when you're applying to colleges to get in, you have to differentiate and stand out. So there's no doubt in my mind that other factors played a role in her acceptance, such as one, she's from California. The universities do have a quota on how many students they take from in state and how many students they take from out of state. They also look at your extracurricular activities at school and as well any volunteering that you may have done when you write in your essay. They want to get a sense of the type of person that you are and making sure that you fit within the campus. And let's not forget that Megan is biracial. So most likely she had used her black card by putting down that she was African American in order to give her that edge because universities do have a diversity quota where they take in so many different races in order to have a diverse and inclusive environment. So putting that on her application combined with all that other stuff, she was a good candidate to get into Northwestern. Now, if she was really so smart, then they would have gave her an academic scholarship, in which they didn't. And come to think about it, has anybody ever heard her making honors in high school? Did she graduate as valedictorian or in the top 10%? No. Same thing with college. Did she graduate summa cum laude or cum laude? No. Has she had any sort of awards? No. And let's not forget when she went to Argentina and wanted to take that diplomatic test, she failed. It did say in Tom Bauer's book, towards the end of her stay, Megan took the Foreign Service Officer's test, the preliminary to judge whether a candidate is sufficiently proficient to take the more demanding exam to enter the State Department. After never showing any interest in maths, a basic requirement to become a diplomat, she failed the 3-hour exam. Yeah, so I highly doubt that while she was riding around in that motorcade down in Argentina feeling all important with the Secretary General, that he was looking at her thinking that, wow, Megan, you're really smart.
Like I said, I was thankful for the job, but not for how it made me feel, which was not smart. And I would end up leaving with this pit in my stomach, knowing that I was so much more than what was being objectified on the stage.
But she had no problem trying to copy Paris Hilton with this Men's Health, I don't even know what this is, burger promo ad. Paris Hilton was everything that Meghan Markle wanted to be. So Paris Hilton was this week's guest, and the topic was BIMBO. What I felt, and this is my overall assessment after listening to it, and yes, I listened to it because I was genuinely curious about hearing Paris, not so much Meghan. Immediately, what I sensed before listening to the whole entire thing was that Meghan was very insecure, and it was obvious because throughout this podcast, there were little passive aggressive digs that Meghan was making. What's interesting, and we'll get to the end, was that Meghan does admit that she had a judgment. Everything that Paris has is what Meghan wants. And in some way, I think today's podcast, she made herself feel better by putting in these little digs that made her come across as being better than Paris. And I think in some way that's rooted in her being envious, being jealous, and also insecure. The very first indicator of these passive aggressive digs was this.
I'm talking to a woman who built an entire brand out of being the dumb blonde.
And that's where Meghan started this podcast, by reducing Paris Hilton to this dumb blonde. Paris Hilton's brand is bigger than just being dumb blonde. Admittedly so, she played off of being the dumb blonde in the very beginning when she was on the show The Simple Life, but that's what people wanted to see. But there was so much more to Paris Hilton. And yeah, I get she had a questionable video that came out, and I'm glad that it was not brought up on this podcast. But there was so much more to Paris. It was about the luxurious lifestyle. She was, in theory, the first real influencer. People wanted to wear the clothes that she was wearing. She was really beautiful, living in this high life. She modeled, she had a perfume line. She got to do everything that she wanted to do. And on top of that, she also became a well known DJ and traveled the world, playing at very high end events and headlining certain festivals. I mean, she really did put herself out there and pursued whatever was her passion. She did not rely on just being the dumb blonde. She took what she had and she explored her talents. What Meghan's failing to understand is that Paris Hilton grew up and she got past the phase of being this immature teenager who went and partied everywhere. She legitimately became an entrepreneur and businesswoman, and she had been living her best life and not worrying about what the media was saying about her or seeking that kind of attention by purposely paying a PR company to be putting her out every single day in front of the world with all different stories, like what Meghan Markle has been doing. I have to say, from listening to her today and just understanding some of the things that she has worked on in the past, she went through some really horrific things. And Meghan Markle exploited that today, in my opinion. And in the next sound clip, you can hear Meghan. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the more truthful moments that she's had where you can hear the envy and jealousy.
I've been doing a lot of conversations. I've been the most nervous about this one.
Really? Why were you nervous? I was so nervous too, but why were you nervous?
Why would you be nervous? Well, I'll tell you first.
Yeah, you tell me first.
I'll tell you first. Because I remember growing up in LA around the same age, and you were just so famous and so beautiful and so...
And Paris is filthy stinking rich. It's everything that Meghan was aspiring to be growing up in LA during that time.
I mean, there was this moment and you were in that zeitgeist and I was this nerd. Mm-hmm. So it was so hard for me.
Again, Meghan wants you to think that she's smart and that she was some kind of bookworm. Now, the time or the era that she's talking about is the late 90s, early 2000s. Megan was in her senior year of high school, going off to university. Now, the next passive aggressive dig Megan takes at Paris is right here. I do recall during that time she was riding around in cars talking about boys and telling her best friend that she should be going to Fredericks of Hollywood lingerie shop. So I am not buying
To
this
think
one.
about what you and I would talk about when so much of the identity, whether it was placed upon you or you adopted or embraced or used to build a career, was about not leaning into being smart.
And right there, my friends, is the backhanded comment where she's essentially telling Paris that I don't know what I would have in common with you because you're actually stupid. And in that moment, I think she felt bigger than Paris Hilton because she was able to look down at her and say, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to talk to you about because you have no substance, which is quite ironic because it's the actual reverse. Megan has no substance. So, I think Paris essentially wasted her time giving it to this vacuous, soulless bimbo. And then Paris Hilton admits that she was nervous because she never met Megan before, and overall, Paris is just a shy person. But what convinced her to do this podcast was after she heard the Serena Williams podcast on ambition. Somehow she thought Megan was this awesome girl's girl and chose to come on the show, which, in my opinion, I think she was suckered. Knowing that Megan is a predator and feeds off of people who are vulnerable or takes advantage of vulnerable moments, I felt very uncomfortable with what she says next. And if your skin crawls when you hear this, know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Look, I want this to be, for anyone who's with me, this is a safe place. I want you to be yourself. And so if anything I can offer is for us to be able to go, okay, cool.
It's like Megan's luring her in to be like, oh, it's okay. You can tell me anything. Your secret's safe with me.
You can be your tomboy, nerd, all the things you just listed self that no one knows, I don't think, is part of how you would self-identify. And that's what I want us to talk about. So I just want to talk to you, the real you.
Thank you.
So now, as Megan is talking about Paris from the early 90s, she acknowledges that her memory of her was incredibly strong and her being seen as this it girl. So again, here you have a little bit of her envy coming out in where she's talking about this vivid memory. And throughout this conversation with Paris, again, Megan misses the mark in understanding the difference between archetype and stereotype. So they talk a bit about the simple life and how the bimbo stereotype or archetype that Megan keeps referring to is what role that Paris decides to take on as she's promoting the show and has been gaining popularity. So where there was this understanding or projection of Paris being this dumb blonde was all part of playing a role that the public wanted. And Paris took this dumb blonde stereotype and turned it into hard cash. And that was the thing. She was smart enough to recognize that she used this in a positive way or to her advantage to advance in whatever she wanted, whether it be fame, influencing. And although Paris had moments of where she was very positive, Megan sort of pulled her back into being this victim of being called this bimbo or someone who was a party girl. And just as Paris was talking about her formative years and growing up and moving to New York City and going out to the clubs and then being featured in Page Six, Paris goes into talking about what people started to say about her and craft an image, even though the stories might have been false, the media was putting out this image of this heiress who had a lot of money and was just plain wild. So Megan responds, and it really doesn't make any sense. In fact, it's it's almost giving it back to Paris, saying, well, because you are this heiress, you're going to be subjected to this. And she says, completely. But to that point, you are an heiress, right? Yes, you do come from a wealthy family. So those things in some way, whether it has a connotation to it or not, those are rooted in truth. But the other pieces of it, I mean, that's where I guess the question mark comes in, because this is a really formative age where you're figuring out who you are and you're so impressionable. Now, this paragraph made absolutely no sense. It's just a bunch of word salad mixing around. In one way, she's saying, well, because, you're wealthy and you have a famous family, you're subjected to it. And that's how I interpreted it. To me, it was like another passive aggressive dig. And after that, she goes into talking about the TV show that really blew up Paris Hilton across the US, which was The Simple Life. Paris discloses to Meghan that the producers of this show had crafted this reality show where Paris was supposed to play this dumb blonde and Nicole Richie was playing the mischievous, wicked one. And it just worked. And that is what the country started to recognize her for. There were some pretty iconic moments where Paris Hilton is like, what's a Walmart? And also the starring role of Tinkerbell, her dog. They talk about that. But then it quickly shifts over into Meghan now pulling out of Paris the story about her going away to this rehabilitation camp for troubled teens and the abuse that she endured. And throughout Paris telling this story, Meghan does not appear to be connecting and, in a sense, almost enjoying hearing Paris's pain.
All types of abuse are happening at these schools. Sorry, I get a little emotional when I think about it. But they just on a daily basis, it was all about really breaking you down. So you're worthless. No one loves you. You're going to be nothing in life. They would just do that to all of us all day long. It was very painful.
And in this moment, after Paris shares her soul, there's a long pause. And Meghan gives a response. It's almost canned, where she doesn't know what to say because she has never been in that situation. Her life has been pretty cushy. And trying to be empathetic is a good attempt. I give a C plus for effort, but she really doesn't understand what Paris went through. And what was interesting about this podcast, and I'm not going to go into more because, quite frankly, I cannot listen to Meghan's voice, but it's just so fake and it does not seem sincere. And she actually allows Paris Hilton to tell her harrowing story. It's almost like, I'm going to keep quiet because I want to hear about all the terrible things that happened to you so I could feel better. And for the first time, she is not interrupting. She is not talking about herself. It's almost like she's living and hearing Paris's pain. And the fact that at the end of this podcast, she does admit that she went in with a judgment and that there was a bit of envy. You know that there was some sort of satisfaction of Paris showing her that she does not have this perfect life or did not have the easiest time growing up, and life wasn't always as rosy. And it almost makes her feel a little bit better that this person who she had admired and who she envied, who had everything, was knocked down a couple pegs because she was put into a situation where she was treated terribly. And people like Meghan Markle, who are narcissists, they want to destroy other people who are successful in that manner. So for this podcast, I mean, she really is allowing Paris to let her, soul come out and talk about all this pain while taking it in. And, whether she's giving her sigh hum or, shaking her head like, I can't believe that, this happened to you. It's so dangerous. And it really doesn't tell me that she understands. And part of her being so empathetic or acting so empathetic, I do believe that she sees Paris Hilton as a person that she can network with who is going to help her in some way because she is connected to so many people and is a very successful entrepreneur. I just hope Paris does not get involved with this monster because what she has going on right now is working. And everybody knows that anything that Meghan Markle touches turns to shit. So, my personal advice is for her to stay away from this woman and let it be a lesson to her that this woman is not somebody you want to bring into your circle of friends. Hands down, no. So, Megan then brings on a comedian. I don't know who she is. And at this point, like, I'm so tired of her getting this archetypes and stereotypes wrong in the sense of how she's using it, as well as sort of making herself continue to look like she is this prim and proper person who didn't use her sex appeal in order to advance herself, which we all know that she did. What is interesting is that she continues to keep digging at Paris Hilton, and she goes in again to emphasize that Paris Hilton built her brand again off of being the dumb blonde, when it just appears to me that she didn't listen to anything that Paris had to say about all the things that she accomplished as she got out of this horrible situation. But then, no, Megan goes back to saying that she built her brand off of being a dumb blonde. So again, another passive aggressive attempt.
Paris has made a lucrative career off the dumb blonde trope.
So the podcast winds down, and Megan ends with her normal odd question of asking her guests, what are 3 words that would describe themselves when they were a little girl and what they would be? So Paris says fun, playful, curious. That wasn't good enough for Megan because she needed to make sure that that wound is still fresh. And she's like, no, and specific to you because of your time at this school and the work that you're doing to correct that, what describes yourself when you were at that boarding school. So, of course, she's making Paris feel these memories. And Paris says terrified, miserable, and lonely. And you got to question what was the motive behind that? Was that to leave her feeling as the victim? And then again, she asked the 3 words to describe the woman that she's become today. And she said strong, brilliant, and brave. And then Megan, in a disingenuous, condescending tone, says, I love all of that. Yeah, whatever. Everything that I was feeling through this podcast was summarized and confirmed at the very end. Megan could have ended this podcast just the way it was. But no, she had to do what she did when she was talking to Mariah. Was after Paris left, she went ahead and this is what she said. Megan's closing thoughts. Well, well, well. Okay. You heard me at the beginning of this episode talk about how I was nervous for this one. Nervous because, well, I'm embarrassed to admit it. I had a judgment about Paris, and I don't like having a judgment. It doesn't feel good, but I had to be real about it because when I grew up, she was beautiful, rich, and famous. What could possibly be wrong with her life, I would think. And because my entire sense of self confidence was wrapped up in being the smart one and not the pretty one, I found the way to project all of my judgment and envy onto her. Who would want to act stupid, I would think? Envy can be a very dangerous thing, as can judgment. I was ashamed to admit that I harbored either of those feelings. So I talked to her, and while she admits that she played into this dumb blonde persona that she is in part co created with the media, she also revealed years of trauma that likely made it less easy to carve out her own identity. And just in that paragraph alone, confirmed everything I had sensed as she was probing and talking to Paris Hilton. Megan is the mean girl type who is envious and jealous of others who have the spotlight and attention. And because she's such a fame whore and so greedy for money, seeing Paris thrive and seeing her, achieve the successes that she wanted, it's that kind of same envy that she has for Catherine. But because now there's a potential for her to become friends and maybe take advantage of her network, she's going to treat that relationship with the love bombing that she normally does. And when she's done with Paris, and I hope that Paris doesn't take her on, she is a snake and you can't trust her. And throughout this entire podcast, she keeps misusing the word archetype. It should be stereotype, but she finishes off by saying, being dumb, playing the archetype of the dumb blonde, that was a safety mechanism. It was expected of her. Shut up, Megan. Just shut up. It was a mask. And as the woman she is today, the smartest thing she has done outside of finding entrepreneurial success is finding herself. In our conversation, I found her to be refreshing. And look, I know she's made mistakes. I've heard about some of them. So there you go. Paris has already now confided in Megan. Others not, right? So she says, I've heard about some of them, others not, meaning some she disclosed, maybe making her feel special. This is not to be framed as the defense of Paris Hilton, but it is the humanization of her, because that's where we leave judgments at the door. That's when we can see a woman behind the archetype. I'm sorry for having judged her. I didn't know her. And as I assured her, I wasn't looking for a gotcha moment. Bullshit, you did give her a gotcha moment by being passive aggressive and in some cases talking down to her as if you are superior. So shut up, Megan, just shut up. And then she ends with, I was looking for a got you moment, and I think we did. Whatever, man. Look, the only reason why I listened to this was because I was genuinely interested in hearing Paris's story, and I'm glad that Megan allowed her to somewhat tell it. However, I, didn't like the way that she came across because I immediately sensed that she is jealous of Paris and she is inferior to her, and you could tell that. It's really sad that this woman has to make herself feel better by cutting others down. And the way that she is not understanding or getting the point of what an archetype is versus what a stereotype is really getting on my nerves. I think that she needs to get a dictionary. If she's so smart, at least get that right. Anyhow, this was the podcast. There were other portions of it. I just didn't feel like covering it because this podcast is just nonsense. And Megan is demonstrating ways on how she's setting women backwards, not forwards. And the people that she is bringing onto it, it's all the same woke nonsense. It's nothing that you really want to pay attention to. And Megan's not really connecting to it. So I just am not understanding why people are giving her the time of day. And, I was also quite surprised and alarmed that Paris would go ahead and give Meghan Markle the time of day. I just hope that she is careful and does not get sucked into this woman's narcissistic weave because she is a true sociopath. And she's going to take advantage of whatever relationships, whatever resources that Paris Hilton has. And that could actually hurt her brand. So if you're listening to this, Paris, stay the F away from this woman because she is next level lunatic. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts and comments below. If you want to read the full transcript, I'll put it in the description box. I'll link it there. So I would check it out, at least to hear Paris's story because it is worthwhile. I will be back soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.
It was such a fraud.